Welcome back. Many of us remember those high school days where we just sat there and memorized information that we thought was useless. It was not relevant to our lives. A prime example is chemistry. Many of us don't understand what an atom is. And like our chemistry teacher did not understand that back in the day. He kept saying atoms and electrons and protons, yet none of us really understood the grasp of it. And when we took our last chemistry test, we said, oh, thank God, I don't have to remember any of this stuff anymore. I'm done with this. Thank God, I'm moving on with my life. However, we do have a professor that wants to change all of that. She wants to bring the microscopic, the atoms, the small things in life, and help us envision them in the macroscopic world that we live in. She wants to use the analogies, the interactions that we have of our daily lives, and be able to replicate that in the microscopic world. Today, we have Ms. Corianos with us, and she's going to help us explain all of that in just a little bit. Please help me welcome Ms. Corianos. How are you?
Good, thank you for having me today.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I just introduced the audience to what you were just saying. So please tell us more about your philosophy regarding how chemistry should be taught.
Well, for many of us, going through chemistry, whether it be in our high school or in our college days, it's really the bane of our existences, right? We've all experienced those chemistry days, but honestly, I understand this because it's hard. Most things in chemistry have to do with these microscopic interactions that we can't see. And it's very difficult to envision,
Right.
But it's also really a shame because chemistry has such an important influence in our everyday lives.
That's what we're told.
Right. So one summer when I was, early in my teaching, I was trying to think of a way that I could get through to my students better the next year. And I was walking in the flea market one day and was suddenly inspired by the interactions that were going on there. And I started believing that we can analogize our macroscopic lives to the microscopic concepts in chemistry.
So you're talking about this flea market, right? We've all been to the flea market. So what happened in particular in the flea market?
Well, you see, one day I was walking around the flea market. It was really your classic flea market interaction. I was walking around.
And we have a video of this, right?
Yeah, we do have a video.
That's good.
And so I was walking around and I found this purse stand that caught my eye. And there were two purses that I liked, but the nicer one that I really liked was, of course, a little more expensive and was a little out of my budget for that day.
Right.
I tried to negotiate with the vendor, but she was pretty solid on her original price. So I was a little disappointed, but this interaction sort of reminded me of how atoms interact.
Right. Unfortunately, I don't see the connection that you're trying to make, because I get it, you went to a flea market, you tried to get the best deal out there, and, it didn't work out. And many of us have gone through that. But none of us have thought of chemistry, and I assure you of that. So you want to help us, get into the framework of what you're trying to get at?
Right, no problem. Let me explain a little further. So the fundamental unit of chemistry that we usually learn about in our intro chem classes is called the atom. And the atom makes up the elements such as carbon and oxygen, which we can find on the periodic table.
Oh, that's evil.
So atoms also consist of even smaller parts. So the nucleus is made up of protons, which are positively charged, and neutrons, which have no charge. And then there are also several outer shells outside of the nucleus that are filled with negatively charged electrons. So the outermost shell of these electrons is called the valence shell. Now most atoms can take 8 electrons in this valence shell. However, many atoms in their most basic state do not already have 8 electrons. So they're actually unstable in their most basic state. So, in order to become stable, they bond with other atoms in order to gain this full octet or full 8 electrons in their outermost valence shell. Now they can do this by either sharing electrons, donating electrons, or receiving electrons from other atoms.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a video of this.
We do, in fact. Right, so as we can see here, sodium only has 1 electron in its outermost shell of its valence shell. However, it wants 8. So how's it gonna compensate for that? Well, chlorine over here has 7 electrons in its valence shell. So if sodium gives an electron to chlorine, now chlorine has 8 electrons in its outermost shell, And sodium goes down to the previous valence shell, which has already 8 filled electrons.
I'm sorry, Maria, but I'm having some trouble understanding. All you explained to me so far is bringing back some dark memories.
Oh
Some
dear.
dark memories from high school, which I have buried away, and I would thought I'd never come back. What is it that when you went to buy that bag, that purse, in the flea market, what is it that you saw in chemistry? I am still not understanding. Please explain to us what it is that you saw.
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize if I brought back any dark memories for the rest of you.
Well,
Um,
there's nothing you can do about that now.
well, oops. So, when we walk around in our daily lives, similarly to atoms, we as people are not always in our most happy or stable of states.
Right.
And sometimes we're not in this happy state because we want something, say a consumer product, right? So, in this example here, when I was at the flea market, I was not in my happiest of states because I really wanted a purse.
Right.
However, I had to choose which purse to buy based on likability and affordability, right?
Okay.
So, and then once I decided, I had to pay for that purse with money. Now, this transaction would leave me happy because I would have gained a purse, which I wanted, and it would leave the vendor happy because she will have received a monetary compensation. Just like when atoms bond, both of them reach a happier state, right? So, also though, when atoms bond, they have to put in something to it, just like we have to put in money, right? So atoms have to put in or give off energy. This is their form of compensation in order to reach that more stable state. And they won't bond, atoms won't bond if that means that they will receive a less stable state. Just like we try not to buy things that are over our budgets so that we don't go in debt, because that would leave us, or I think I can speak for most of us, and being in debt is not a happy thing.
Yeah.
If we were to spend too much, we'd probably be less happy.
Well, that's of course.
So I'm starting to see your analogy of how atoms bond through sharing electrons, through accepting electrons, through donating electrons. And I think a lot of people understand the accepting and donating part, that you buy a purse, right? And so that's sort of accepting an electron. You donate a purse by selling an electron.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, and me especially, I'm having like a hard time understanding what this sharing of electron is using your analogy. Because when you buy a purse, it's your purse. It's not, you're not sharing it with somebody else.
Right, okay, so I think going back to the analogy, I think that we can agree that in the consumer market, not necessarily all transactions are equal. So, for instance, with one transaction may make the customer or the vendor more happy than the other for whatever reason. Like in the case of me buying a purse, the vendor, she was happy either way, whether I bought this purse or that purse, because either way she would get income and she would sell a product. Whereas, for me, it was a little different because, if I bought the cheaper purse, yes, I was happy that I got a purse, but I wasn't quite as happy as I could have been, or maybe as happy as the vendor, because I didn't get the exact purse that I wanted.
Okay.
In other transactions, maybe the customer, doesn't want to buy a product as much as the vendor wants to sell that product. So you have this discrepancy. And atoms similarly, want electrons. But some atoms want electrons more than others, and this, wanting of electrons is called electronegativity. So atoms with high electronegativity really want to gain an electron, whereas atoms with low electronegativity would really rather give one up.
Right.
Now, when you have a huge disparity in how much the consumer atom versus the vendor atom wants an electron, you can create an ionic bond. And that's like a sodium and chloride example that we saw, where the sodium actually gave an entire electron to the chlorine. But however, sometimes there's a lower discrepancy between how much atoms want in electrons, and maybe they sort of, the consumer wants to buy the electron just as much as the vendor wants to sell it. And so then, you get this sharing of the happiness that happens after the transaction, and that's called covalent bonding. And, but then you also have what's called polar covalent bonding, and that's kind of when, maybe how much the atoms want electrons is not quite equal, but one, it's not quite as high a disparity as an ionic bonding.
That proves to be great insight. And unfortunately we're out of time. But thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.